In 2004, shortly after I moved to the Midwest from Southwest Ohio, something happened that forever changed my life. It was a cool fall evening, and 12 young men, and I don't think it was an accident that that's the exact same number as the disciples. 12 young men showed up at a Wendy's restaurant in Cottage Grove, Minnesota, to participate in what many consider to be a milestone in human achievement. It was on this day that 12 young men accepted what has become known as the Wendy's Dollar Menu Challenge. What is the Wendy's Dollar Menu Challenge, you might ask? Well, in short, here's what it is. You get one sitting to eat every item on the Wendy's Dollar Menu. Without interruption, you are required to eat what was at that time 11 items. It doesn't exist anymore, but at that time it was 11 items. Junior bacon cheeseburger, junior cheeseburger deluxe, double cheeseburger, biggie fries, 5-piece chicken nuggets, baked potato, chili, side salad, Caesar side salad, Frosty, and a biggie drink. And you had to eat all 11 items in one sitting for the challenge. And of the 12 of us that accepted this challenge, only 5 of us successfully completed it. Why? Because it was horrible. It was a terrible experience. In fact, for some of us, it was very difficult. For others of us, though, it wasn't that horrible. In fact, one guy, he ate everything in like 20 minutes, and then immediately after that, ran around the Wendy's restaurant 5 times. The dude has the metabolism of a cheetah, I guess. Now, I was one of the Dollar Menu champions, but I got to confess to you that my strategy was stupid. It was really stupid because I waited until the very end to eat the 2 salads. And I hate salad. I hate it. So this was double misery for me. I should have eaten, in retrospect, the salads very first and then saved the Frosty for the end so that it would slide down and take up all the empty spaces left in my stomach. But I didn't do that. But I did finish the challenge, and immediately after I ate the last bite of the last salad, I knew that my life would never be the same again. The obvious thing that changed for me was physically. My body has never worked the same since. It's not as it was designed. I was hurting, to be honest with you. That was one of the changes that I didn't anticipate, or I did anticipate. The other one I didn't anticipate at all, because after this last supper, this metaphorical last supper, as I lay on my apartment floor in my stretchy pants, I realized at that moment that I would never eat Wendy's again. No, I'm just kidding. I would eat Wendy's again. But what I really realized was that there is something really powerful, dare I say miraculous, about a meal. The realization that I came to after having consumed all that food that surprised me the most was that there's something unique about the meals that we eat. You see, a few months earlier, I had moved to this area, and for me, it was a new area. I was far, far away from the rural Ohio context in which I grew up, and I moved to this area because I was starting a new job. I was leaving behind all of the things that I considered familiar at that point in my life. I left Southwest Ohio, moved to the Midwest. I left my family. I left my friends. I left a house that I had restored that I loved so much. I left the comfort of my hometown. And for the very first time in my life, I found myself disconnected. That was until the meal. And what began as 11 guys with whom I had no connection other than the fact that we went to the exact same church, other than the fact that we did that, we had no connection. But after that meal, we became a circle of friends. And as the years passed by, I had the great privilege of being a part of their lives. In addition to the endless recounting of the story of our shared gluttony over even more meals, I had the privilege of walking with them as they went through the highs and the lows of life. I had the privilege of walking with them when they were on top of the mountain and as well as when they struggled with life. Simple things even, like getting an acceptance letter to college, or graduating from high school or graduate school, or joining the military. I had the ability and the privilege of walking with them as they changed jobs and moved to other states, and as they broke down and cried over things that were happening in their lives. I had the ability to walk with them over a number of years as they ended relationships and began new ones, as they fought with their parents and their families and their siblings, as they bought new cars, as they confessed deeply painful experiences in their lives, as well as experiencing freedom from sin and things that held them back. So over the course of our years together, I gave them advice, and I received life-changing advice from them as well. As I think about those relationships, and as I think about the time that we spent together, the question is, where did it all begin? Where did that connection start? And the answer is simply this. It began with a meal. And what started for me as a group of strangers, after that meal, we became a band of brothers, because you see, there is something very powerful about a meal. And I know this to be true from that experience, but also as a pastor for like 25 years now, I've seen God do amazing things during the course of a meal. I've seen the start of relationships, and I've seen the start of friendships occur during the course of a meal. I've seen forgiveness offered to individuals. I've seen forgiveness received by individuals during a meal. I've seen marriages restored. I've seen friendships renewed. I've seen sin confessed and love expressed, because there's something very powerful that happens when people sit together to eat. There's something almost miraculous about a meal. And I would say to you that I believe the secret in the meal's magic lies in its ability to generate story. A meal, I'm not talking about rushing through Mickey D's drive-thru. I'm talking about a meal. A meal, it forces us to stop life for a little bit. It forces us to slow down and talk and to share and to listen and understand. You see, I think a meal is a place to see and be seen. It's a place to hear and be heard. It's a place to speak and to understand. It's a place to connect. A meal is a place where strangers can become friends, because after all, a stranger is only someone whose story you have yet to hear. And I would say that nobody knew this truth or lived out this truth better than Jesus. In fact, the most common accusation that his enemies hurled at him throughout his ministry had to do with how he ate his meals and with whom he ate those meals. And his meals were always legendary. And as we're about to find out, they were also revolutionary. And so we talk a lot about Jesus' teaching, and we talk a lot about his miracles. But today, what I want us to do is look at one of his meals. Because when Jesus sat down with people to eat, when he sat down with people for a meal, something amazing always happened. Because Jesus understood that strangers can become connected, not because of our well-reasoned arguments, but rather because of our well-seasoned steaks on the grill. I think Jesus knew the eternal truth that people tend to open their hearts when on the grill there are some brats. Take that with you, right? So today I want to talk all about food. I want to talk about eating. I want to talk about strategic suppering, about deliberate dining. In fact, the sermon today is sponsored by Aldi's. I'm just kidding. That's not true. I wish, but that's not true. In fact, it is brought to you by a guy, one of the earliest disciples of Jesus, a guy by the name of Matthew. And so if you have a Bible or if you have a Bible app with you today, I want to invite you to open up with me to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9. And so we're going to pick up the story, Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verse 9. If you don't have a Bible, no worries. We're going to put it on the screen so you can follow along as well. But here's how the story goes. Verse 9 says this: As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting in the tax collector's office. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me." And so Matthew, got up and followed him. Now, on the surface, when you read this particular verse with no context, it sort of reads like no big deal, right? This dude named Matt, he gets an invitation to Jesus to follow him, and so he decides to do that. But in the first century context, what just happened in this one verse, these few words, what just happened was unthinkable. It was unreal. Quite honestly, it was really repulsive. Because what you have is this holy man, Jesus, this rabbi, has just invited a tax collector to be one of his followers. Now, tax collectors have never been popular in any society. But in the time of Jesus, tax collectors were especially detested. They were especially hated and loathed and abhorred and despised because tax collectors were considered to be the worst of the worst of the worst. And the issue wasn't with the profession per se, but rather it's who they worked for and how they acquired their wealth. Since Israel was occupied by Rome at this moment, the Romans were only interested in how much money they could squeeze out of the Jewish nation. So Rome would let people bid for the chance to collect the taxes on their behalf. And the highest bidder usually got the job. And then he or she would be permitted to collect as much tax as they could get away with. And then what would happen is the tax collector would give to Rome what he promised them, and then they would be able to pocket the rest, which is why the Jews not only hated Rome, but they despised these tax collectors. In fact, they literally put them into the most despised category of professions in this time. That they were literally the moral bottom feeders of society, because the list of the worst jobs, the dirty jobs of that day in that first century world, below professional gamblers, below scam artists, even below dung collectors, which was an actual job in this context, below all of those would be the job of a tax collector. In fact, one author described them this way. He writes, he says, combine the greed of an embezzling executive with the presumption of a hokey TV evangelist. Throw in the audacity of an ambulance-chasing lawyer and the cowardice of a drive-by sniper. Stir in a pinch of a pimp's morality and finish it off with the drug peddler's code of ethics. And what do you have? A first-century tax collector. And that's who Matthew was. That's who we're talking about here. Matthew is a Jew fleecing other Jews for Rome and for personal profit. He would be shunned everywhere he went in his world. He was the kind of guy that you would never, ever think to invite to the neighborhood cookout. He was the kind of guy that was always left off the high school reunion list. No one, and I repeat, no one ever accepted his friend request on Facebook. You would never do that. Everyone kept his or her distance from Matthew. Everyone except Jesus. And so Jesus calls on Matthew to follow him. He invites Matthew to be part of his circle. He invites Matthew to be part of his group. He invites Matthew to be part of his band of brothers. And what's interesting is that we know that Matthew doesn't hesitate to answer positively to Jesus' request, because in the very next scene, we see that Matthew is inviting Jesus over to his casa for a meal. You see, Matthew's answer to Jesus' invitation to follow him is an invitation for Jesus to follow Matthew to his house for a meal. And that's what we see in the story in verse 10. Look at it. It says, then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at the table in the house, in Matthew's house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and began dining with Jesus and his disciples. Now, I read this and I think this is so cool, because what started off as this really interesting dinner for two has turned into this party. And I mean, can you imagine the guest list at this fiesta? I mean, this ain't no potluck for church people. Like, this is not what this event is all about. This is a gathering of notorious, big league, professional sinners. People who have probably not been part of any religious circle for years, maybe even for their entire lives, but they are there because Jesus is there. This is remarkable, but honestly, it's not that surprising, because what we see through all the gospel stories, the biographies of Jesus, what we see over and over again is that people who were nothing like Jesus, people who were nothing like Jesus, this holy rabbi individual, people who were nothing like him, they liked him. And so people start showing up to this party. It becomes quite a big party. And because every good party always has a pooper, the fuddy-duddy Pharisees show up and throw a wet blanket on this messianic meet and greet. Look at verse 11. It says, and when the Pharisees saw this, when they saw this party that they weren't invited to, but others, the outsiders, were, when they saw this, they said to his disciples, notice they didn't speak to Jesus directly, they talked to his entourage. They said to his disciples, why is your teacher eating with the tax collectors and sinners? Now I read this and I'm like, boo, Pharisees, right? I mean, the God Squad shows up uninvited. This moral police of the first century arrive on the scene. These Pharisees, these teachers of religious law, men with clerical collars so tight that their neck veins are bulging out. I mean, they show up uninvited, and now they're all triggered and stunned and shocked and offended because here's Jesus sitting down with these tax collectors and sinners, and they like him, but they're nothing like him. What's interesting is a different translation of the Bible translates this verse 11 this way. I think this is so revealing for what was in their hearts at that moment. Verse 11 reads this way. But when the Pharisees saw this, when they saw these individuals at the party, they asked his disciples, look at this, why does your teacher eat with such what? Scum. Why does your teacher eat with such scum, with those people? And I think when Jesus overheard this absurd question from the Pharisees, he didn't like it at all. In fact, you can almost hear his frustration come out in verse 12. Look at it. But when Jesus heard this, he said, it is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. Jesus is saying here, what kind of doctor separates herself or himself from sick people? I mean, can you imagine a physician who would only meet with and see healthy people? They wouldn't be in business very long. This idea is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. And so in the same way, Jesus makes it crystal clear that his top priority is helping people who have a sin sickness. And it's his job to help them find healing. And it's his job as the doctor to help them be set free. You see, what we learn from this moment, what we learn from this encounter is that Jesus dined with the wrong crowd for all the right reasons. And he gives us this real life example that shows us that there is no one on the planet who deserves to be snubbed by any one of us. That no one should ever be overlooked because of who they are, but rather they should be loved, they should be valued, they should be welcomed. Which is why verse 13 is such a drop the mic moment for Jesus that literally shuts the door. It ends this interaction with these Pharisees. He says this, I love it. He says, now go and learn what this means, which is so insulting to them. He totally insults them in this moment because these guys, these Pharisees and teachers of religious law, they had the Old Testament part of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, memorized from childhood. And Jesus says to them, you guys should go back and read this again and learn what it means. Well, what does he say? And he's going to quote from Hosea, an Old Testament prophet, chapter 6, verse 6. He says, I desire compassion rather than sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, those that think they are righteous, but I came to call those who know they are sinners. That's the mindset and the method and the meals that Jesus was all about, which I think forces us to ask the question of ourselves, are we more like Jesus or more like the Pharisees in who we hang out with? I mean, do we make room in our lives for the Matthews of this world? Do we intentionally reach out to people who feel that they are far from God? People who are not sitting in a church seat on a Sunday morning, especially on Memorial Day weekend. I mean, seriously, there's a special place in heaven for all of you for coming this weekend. Like Jesus, do people who are not like us like us? Are we as individuals, are we as a church like Jesus in that way? The people who are not like us like us. You see, I don't think it's a mistake that the biographers of Jesus record that he sat down and ate meals with many different people at many different times while he was here on the earth. And I think he did it because he knew that there was something miraculous about a meal, that meals matter in a special supernatural way, that they create these opportunities for us to listen and have conversations with other people. It creates this unique opportunity for us to express care to another individual. I think Jesus knew that. I think Jesus knew also well before the Pillsbury Doughboy that nothing says loving like something from the oven. I mean, that's not in the Bible, but it should be. I mean, that's truth, if there ever was truth. But at the same time, I think it's sort of sad that in our 21st century American culture, we've kind of lost the art of sitting down and doing dinners with other people. For much of the last 18 months, we weren't allowed to. It wasn't advised that we would do that. But I would say that even before then, we would say things like, you know what, I'm too busy. I'm too stressed. My house is too messy. Or what I would say is, I can't cook. And if I cooked and they came over, they would die. Like that would be my excuse. And the excuses, quite honestly, are endless. We all have them. I have mine, you have yours. But I can almost picture Jesus responding to our excuses with a, come on, followers. I mean, you can do this. You can do this. I made this really simple for you. In fact, think of it this way. Your next mission trip, or maybe your first mission trip, it doesn't have to be to Honduras. It doesn't have to be to Honduras or any other international context. You don't have to go across the globe to do a mission trip. You can actually go on a mission trip to Walmart or Aldi or the fresh market and buy some food and then invite your neighbor over to eat it with you. And when you do that, the statement that you are making is this, that you matter to me, that you are worth my time and my effort, that you matter to me. And not just me, but you also matter to God. You see, whenever we open that kind of invitation to other people, what we're offering, what we're saying, what we're providing an environment for is for strangers to become friends, for strangers to become neighbors. And so I just want to invite you, I want to ask you, I want to challenge you that maybe you take this kind of step in the next 2 to 3 weeks. As we wrap up this series together, maybe 2-3 weeks in that time, or maybe tomorrow, that you share a meal, that you make an invitation for a dessert or a meal with your neighbor or another person that God has put in your life. I mean, that's quite honestly the next action step of the series called How to Bless Your Neighbor. Because the E in the word bless, B-L-E-S-S, begin with prayer, listen with care, and then E is eat together. That you begin with prayer, you begin asking God, who do you want me to reach out to? Who do you want me to connect with? Who do you want me to be a good neighbor to? And then you begin to build that relationship by listening with care, listening in a way that they can share their story and their life with you, and then take that proactive step of eating together. And I would say when you do this, let me just offer this as some advice, that the goal is not to convert them, it's to eat food, which we all can do. It's just to be kind. It's to listen. It's to simply be hospitable and to have a conversation and trust that that conversation will be guided by God. The role in these meals is not to be some kind of debater or salesman for Christianity. Your role isn't to be Jesus' attorney. Trust me, he doesn't need you as his attorney defending him. Your role is simply to be a host And so I want to invite you to find some time to make the invitation and to take the initiative to share a meal with someone that you might consider to be a stranger. That's it. So simple, yet so compelling. And so I want to say, let's all of us, push through our excuses and push through our fears and take the step across the lawn or across the street or across the hall and invite them to eat together. Because this single act of courage might just be the environment where God chooses to do something unexpected in your life. It might be the moment he chooses to do something extraordinary in your life. In fact, it might be the place and the space where strangers can become friends, where strangers can become neighbors. Because after all, a stranger is only someone whose story you have yet to hear. And I would say that we do that, we make an invitation to eat together, not because that individual deserves it, or because that individual is a good person, or is someone who's fun to hang out with. But we make that offer, that invitation to come to our table because we have been invited to come to Jesus' table ourselves. You see, one of the meals that he had that's recorded in the biographies of Jesus in the Gospels is a meal that we refer to as the Last Supper. And this meal was interesting because in the Last Supper, Jesus gathered this ragtag group, misfits, this motley crew of individuals, everybody from a tax collector to a political zealot. He had them in his small group. And they're sitting together. The night before that he was going to be betrayed, they're sitting together and having this meal together. Jesus knows he's about to die, so he gathers this group and he does something very unique for them. He takes the bread in that moment and he says, this bread that is at our table that I've invited you to, this bread, it represents my body that's going to be broken for you. I'm about to die here shortly. My body's going to be broken. And I want, every time you eat of this bread, I want you to remember me. I want you to remember that you were invited to this table, not because you were a good person or not because you got it all right or not because of who you knew, but you were invited to this table because I wanted you there. And then he took the juice and he said, this juice, this cup represents my blood spilt for you. It represents a new covenant, a new way to relate to God. And every time you drink of this, I want you to remember me. I want you to remember that I took the initiative to come to this earth, to do what I'm about to do, to die on the cross so that you could be included at my table. And so, Cedarbrook, if you would take the bread and eat, and remember that you have been invited to this table because of what he did for you. And then Cedarbrook, take the cup and drink the juice in remembrance of the fact that he paid the ultimate price because he wanted you there. He wanted you there. He wanted to make you not just a stranger to him, but to make you a friend. And so we take our lead from Jesus. That we invite people to our table, not because of what they've done for us, but rather because of what he's done for us. And so we invite those around us to be part of who we are and what we do, because that's what he did for us. Let's pray together. God, we thank you right now for Jesus, and we thank you for the fact that he was willing to come to this earth and make a way for us to have relationship with you when we had broken it down, when we had destroyed it. And rather than excluding us from his presence, he invites us to his table. He invites us to be in relationship with him. He moves us from the state of outsider to friend. And so, God, I pray that as we have lived into that reality, that would inspire us to do the same for those around us, that our invitation would spring from the invitation that we have already received, and that we would accept, and that we would include, and that we would invite to our table in the same way that we have been invited. And so, God, we thank you most of all for Jesus and what he did. And it's through his wonderful name that we pray. And all God's people said, amen.